What if someone you've known your entire life turns out to be someone completely different? What if their past was hidden so well that it could change everything? Welcome to a world of untold stories and shocking truths. Some secrets change lives forever, and this one just might. Let's begin. Meet Emily, a maid working in the grand mansion of the Thompson family. Emily has spent her life in this house, cleaning, organizing, and taking care of everything. She was never one to ask for much, always working quietly in the background. To the Thompsons, she's family, but Emily doesn't feel like she truly belongs. She was adopted by the Thompsons after losing her parents in a tragic car accident. She doesn't remember much about them, just flashes of a life she's never truly known. The Thompsons have been kind to her, but something always feels off. It's like there's a part of her that doesn't fit, a piece of the puzzle missing. Sometimes, Emily would stop, standing still in front of the family portraits on the walls. She'd stare at their faces, longing to understand why they felt so familiar yet distant. It wasn't just the Thompsons. There was someone else, someone she could almost picture, but couldn't remember. A feeling tugged at her like there was something more about her past that she needed to uncover. The name that haunted her thoughts was always the same: Charlotte Winters. It came to her in quiet moments, when she least expected it. Why did it sound so familiar? Was it a name she had once known? It felt like a distant memory, just out of reach. Emily had no memory of it, but somehow, it felt like her real name. Emily's heart would race every time she wondered about it. Was she really Charlotte Winters? Someone else entirely? She felt lost, like a missing piece of her was locked away in the past. Why had no one told her the truth? The Thompsons had always loved her. They were her family, the only ones who had ever been there for her. But something about this name, this mystery, called to her. It made her feel like she was meant for something else, something bigger. She never told anyone about the name or the strange feeling that lingered in her mind. It was easier to ignore it, to focus on her duties. But deep down, Emily knew her story wasn't just about being a maid in a mansion. There was more to her, something hidden, and one day she would find out the truth. Emily's life in the mansion was simple. She woke up early every morning just before dawn. The Thompsons had their breakfast on time, and Emily would ensure everything was in place. She cleaned their rooms, made the beds, and polished the furniture. She did her work quietly, efficiently, always in the background. No one noticed her much, and that was how she liked it. But despite the comfort of her life, something always felt wrong. There was a constant, nagging feeling, like there was a piece of her life missing. No matter how many hours she spent dusting the furniture or folding sheets, her mind wandered. She would catch herself staring at the family portraits hanging on the walls. The faces seemed so familiar, but they weren't. There was something about them that pulled her in, something deeper than just simple recognition. It wasn't just their faces, it was the feeling they gave her. The Thompsons had always treated her with kindness. They gave her a room of her own, food, and shelter. They had always made sure she had everything she needed. But no matter how hard she tried to fit in, something inside her felt disconnected. It was a sense of emptiness, of not truly belonging. It was as if there was a whole part of herself she hadn't discovered yet. Sometimes, when no one was around, Emily would go into the attic. She would spend hours sifting through old family albums and scrapbooks. There was something in the pages that called to her. It was as if she should know these people, these faces in the photos. She didn't, but the feelings they stirred in her were too strong to ignore. The more she thought about it, the more it seemed like the missing puzzle piece. But the more she thought about it, the more questions appeared. Could I really be Charlotte Winters? Was I someone else before this life? She spent hours in her room, thinking about this mystery. She would run her fingers over the pages, staring at the pictures, trying to figure out what it was. Why did they seem so familiar? Why did they feel like pieces of her story that had been lost? Charlotte Winters. The name kept coming back to her. Every time she closed her eyes, it whispered in her thoughts. She didn't know why. She didn't even know who Charlotte Winters was. But the name haunted her. Could it be her real name? Was that who she really was? Why did it feel so familiar? Thon assuming her, but she didn't dare ask the Thompsons. She didn't want to upset them. They were the only family she knew. But the mystery, the name, Charlotte Winterset was starting to feel like her truth. It gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She focused on the chores, tried to keep her mind busy. But no matter how hard she tried, the feeling never went away. She had this memory, a fragment, a flash of a woman who seemed to belong to her. A woman with striking, familiar features. She was holding Emily's hand when she was a little girl. The memory came and went like a dream, blurry and disconnected. Emily would lie in bed at night, wondering who the woman was. Was she someone from her past? The memory always left her with more questions than answers. There was a hole in her heart, and she didn't know how to fill it. Every day she wondered if there was more to her story. She was a part of the Thompsons family, but was that really the whole truth? Was that who she was meant to be? She couldn't stop asking herself these questions. The answers, however, were nowhere to be found. One rainy afternoon, as Emily was preparing tea in the kitchen, the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Curious, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the front door. There stood a man dressed in a sharp suit. He had a serious look on his face. He introduced himself as Gregory Pierce, a lawyer. "I'm here to speak with Emily Thompson," he said, his voice calm but direct. Emily felt a flutter of confusion. Who was this man? Why was he asking for her? She hesitated for a moment, then invited him inside. Gregory walked into the living room and sat down, looking at Emily. He didn't waste time. "I have information about your past. Something you may not know," he began. Emily felt her heart race. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Gregory took a deep breath. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if weighing every word. "Your name isn't Emily Thompson. It's Charlotte Winters." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The name hit her like a thunderclap. "Charlotte Winters?" she repeated, almost unable to believe it. Gregory nodded, handing her a set of documents. "Your true identity was hidden from you," he continued. "You are the missing daughter of Victor Winters, a billionaire. You were kidnapped as a child, and your family has been searching for you ever since." The room felt colder as Emily absorbed his words. Her world seemed to shift. Victor Winters? A billionaire? How could this be real? She had no memory of her true family, no connection to the Winters name. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what Gregory was telling her. Gregory showed her photo-sold family pictures, a little girl with her smiling parents. And in those photos, there was a striking resemblance. The little girl was Charlotte Winters, and she looked just like Emily. Her hands shook as she looked at the pictures. Could this really be her? Was this the truth? Gregory handed her a letter from her biological father. He explained that Victor Winters had been searching for his lost daughter for years. The Winters family had suffered a great tragedy, and they had never stopped looking for Emily. Emily sat there, speechless. Her mind was reeling. She had always wondered about her past, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. Was she really the lost daughter of a billionaire? The heir to a fortune she never knew existed? And if it was true, what did that mean for her? She had been living in the Thompson mansion all these years, thinking they were her real family. How could they have kept this from her? Why had they hidden the truth? As the reality of the situation settled in, Emily's world felt like it was spinning. Gregory Pierce had just dropped a bombshell. Emily was no longer just a maid. She was Charlotte Winters, the missing heir to a vast fortune. Gregory handed her a family photo of a man who looked distant and unfamiliar. He pointed to the man in the photo. "This is Victor Winters, your biological father. He's the one who's been searching for you for years." Emily looked at the photo, trying to make sense of it all. Victor Winters, a billionaire. She had never heard his name before. The only family she knew were the Thompsons, the ones who raised her. But now, everything was being turned upside down. Her heart raced as Gregory spoke about Victor's grief. "He's been devastated by your disappearance. His whole life has been about finding you." Emily stared at the picture, her mind reeling. How could she possibly be this man's daughter? Her whole life had been with the Thompsons, the people who gave her love and care. How could this other family, this billionaire family, be her truth? Gregory continued. Victor Winters was successful, wealthy, and powerful, but he never stopped looking for you. Emily felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. Her mind was overwhelmed. She had no idea what to make of all this. The Thompsons had always treated her like one of their own, but now, Emily was faced with a father she didn't know and a wealth she had never imagined. Then Emily remembered something. The Thompsons had never spoken about her real family. They'd always told her parents died in the car accident. They raised her as their own, but they never mentioned her biological family. Why hadn't they told her the truth? Why had they kept it a secret for so long? She turned to Gregory. Why did the Thompsons hide this from me? Gregory didn't answer immediately, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. They were protecting you. The world would have seen you as a target. The media, the press, it could have destroyed your life. But Emily wasn't sure she believed that. The Thompsons were kind, yes. But why had they kept the truth from her? She had lived her whole life believing she was their daughter. Now, the truth felt like a betrayal. She stood up, feeling the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. I need time, she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. Gregory nodded. I understand. But Victor Winters has been waiting for this moment for a long time. He wants to meet you. The reality of it all began to hit Emily. Victor Winters, the powerful businessman, was her biological father. And yet, she had spent her whole life with the Thompsons, who had always been there for her. What did this revelation mean for her? As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for that change. After Gregory left, Emily sat in the living room, her mind racing. The weight of the revelation was heavy on her shoulders. She had always wondered who she was, what her place in the world was, but never, in a million years, had she imagined it would be like this. She wasn't just a maid in a wealthy mansion. She wasn't just Emily Thompson. She was Charlotte Winters, the daughter of a billionaire, a lost heir to a fortune that she never knew existed. Her mind replayed the moment over and over again. Gregory's words echoed in her thoughts. You're Charlotte Winters. Your father is Victor Winters, the billionaire businessman. It sounded surreal, like something out of a movie. But it was real, and as the reality of it sank in, Emily's heart began to race. She had been Emily Thompson all her life. How could she suddenly become Charlotte Winters, a person she didn't even recognize? Victor Winters, her biological father. The thought made her feel like an outsider. She had never known him, never heard his name until now. Her whole life had been spent with the Thompsons. They were her family, the people who raised her, loved her, and cared for her. And now she was supposed to step into a new life, one that was full of wealth, power, and strangers. But could she really walk away from everything she knew? Could she leave the Thompsons behind, the people who had given her everything? She had spent years with them, learning from them, laughing with them, crying with them. They had shaped who she was, and she loved them deeply. But now, it felt like there was a huge divide between her two worlds. One world was filled with love and security, a family that had supported her. The other was full of unknowns, a family she had never known, but was now being pulled toward. Her mind was in turmoil. She felt torn, unsure of where she belonged. The Thompsons had treated her like their own daughter, and for all intents and purposes, they were her family. She had grown up with them, and they had always been there for her. But now, it felt like her entire life had been built on a lie. Had they kept this secret to protect her, or was there something darker at play? Why hadn't they told her the truth? Why hadn't they prepared her for this moment? Was it wrong of her to want to stay with them, to continue living the life she had always known? Then there was Victor Winters, a billionaire who had spent years searching for his lost daughter. He was waiting for her, hoping to bring her into his world. She was supposed to be his heir, to step into the life she was meant for. But how could she fit into that world when it felt so foreign? Could she really leave the Thompsons behind and join a family she had no connection with? Could she accept the wealth, the power, and all that came with it? Emily had never asked for any of this. She had never known her true identity, and she certainly never expected to be thrust into the life of a billionaire. The Thompsons had always given her everything she needed, but could she betray them now? She wondered if the Thompsons would even understand her decision. Would they accept her if she chose to go with Victor Winters? Would they feel hurt, abandoned by the very person they had raised? Her heart was torn between two families, two lives. One life had been filled with love, comfort, and familiarity. The other was full of promises, but also uncertainty. She couldn't stop wondering if she was ready to take that step into the unknown. Could she give up the life she had always known? Could she walk away from the Thompsons, who had been her family for so long? The thought of leaving them behind made her feel like a traitor, a person who had turned her back on the only people who had ever truly cared for her. The media was already all over the story. She had seen the headlines: "The missing billionaire heiress returns," "Charlotte Winters, the lost daughter of Victor Winters, found." Her life was now a public spectacle, and she had no control over it. The world was watching her, and the weight of it all was suffocating. She didn't want this attention. She didn't want to be the center of a media frenzy. All she wanted was peace, to make her decision in private, without the eyes of the world on her. But now, there was no escaping it. Her life would never be the same. The choice was overwhelming. Should she embrace her biological father and the world that came with him? Or should she stay with the Thompsons, the family who had always loved and cared for her? Could she really betray them? Could she really leave them behind and accept a new life as Charlotte Winters? The more she thought about it, the more conflicted she became. Emily sat by the window, staring out at the rain falling softly against the glass. She wanted to stay in the world she knew, the world where she felt safe and loved. But the pull of the truth, the pull of her biological family, was strong. Her whole life had been a question, and now it felt like the answer was right in front of her. But was she ready to face it? The days following Gregory's visit felt like they lasted forever. Emily could barely sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and each thought only led to more confusion. She was no longer just a maid in a mansion. She wasn't just Emily Thompson. She was Charlotte Winters, the lost daughter of Victor Winters, a billionaire businessman. But could she really step into that world? Could she leave everything behind? She spent every waking moment thinking about the Thompsons. They had loved her since she was a child. They had treated her like their own. The Thompsons' love was all she had ever known. But now, she was faced with a life that had been hidden from her for years. A life full of power, wealth, and unknowns. Was it really the life she was meant for? Every time Emily closed her eyes, the image of Victor Winters appeared. His picture, his letters, the photographs of her childhood, everything felt like a puzzle. She had been living her entire life with the Thompsons, and yet, now she realized she was meant to be with a different family. But how could she make that leap? How could she leave the Thompsons, the people who had given her everything? Her loyalty to them ran deep, and the thought of leaving them behind made her heart ache. The conflict was unbearable. Her heart was torn between two worlds, the world she knew and the world that awaited her. But even as the pull of her biological family grew stronger, Emily knew that leaving the Thompsons wasn't an easy decision. They had been there for her every moment, giving her stability and love. Could she really turn her back on all of that for a family she didn't know? Victor Winters was waiting for her, but was she ready to meet him? Was she ready to walk into a world where she would be expected to take up a role she didn't understand? The pressure of this new identity was overwhelming. But the Thompsonshire family didn't deserve to be left behind. Emily loved them, and she didn't want to betray them. One evening, Emily sat alone in her room, staring at the letter from Victor Winters. It had been sitting on her desk for days unopened. She had stared at it 1,000 times, but something held her back from reading it. It was as though opening it would force her to make a decision. But she wasn't ready. What if reading the letter made it all real? What if it made her choose? The weight of it all was almost unbearable. How could she choose between the life she had always known and the life that was waiting for her. The Thompsons had always been supportive, always been there. But this was the truth, the undeniable truth, and she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't keep running from the truth forever. And so, she walked downstairs to the living room where the Thompsons were waiting. The weight of the world felt heavier than ever, but this time Emily was determined to confront it. The Thompsons looked at her as she sat down with them. Their faces were full of concern, but they didn't know the full extent of what was going on inside her. They didn't know the pain she was feeling, the deep divide in her heart. She took a deep breath and began. "I have to tell you something," Emily started, her voice trembling. The Thompsons leaned in, sensing that something was about to change. She explained everything Victor Winters, the truth about her identity, and the decision she had to make. As she spoke, she looked at their faces, hoping to see understanding, but all she saw was shock. The room was silent as the Thompsons processed her words. Her adoptive father, Thomas Thompson, was the first to speak. "Emily or Charlotte?" he said softly, his voice full of emotion. "We've known for years, but we didn't want to burden you with the truth. You've always been our daughter, and we didn't want anything to change that. But now, we see that the truth has to come out. It's your life, and you need to make the decision that's best for you." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she looked at the Thompsons. She couldn't fathom leaving them behind. They had given her everything, everything she needed to be who she was. And yet, she knew that she couldn't continue living in the shadows of this truth. Her mother, Victoria Thompson, reached over and took her hand. "We love you, Emily. We always have, and we always will. Whatever you choose, we will stand by you. But we also know you have to find out who you are. This is your journey, and we want you to be happy. Just know that we'll always be your family, no matter what." Emily sat there, staring at her parents. Her heart ached with love for them, but at the same time, she knew that a new chapter was calling her. Could she really leave the Thompsons behind for a family she didn't know? But they were right. Her journey wasn't just about staying in the life she knew. It was about understanding her past and finding out who she truly was. As Emily stood up, her mind was still racing. She needed to decide. But one thing was certain no matter which path she chose. The Thompsons would always be her family. And no matter what, they would love her. The days that followed the decision were some of the most challenging Emily had ever faced. Her mind was still filled with uncertainty. But deep down, she felt like a weight had been lifted. She had made her choice. She had chosen to meet Victor Winters, the father she had never known. The road ahead was still unclear, but she knew she had to take the first step toward embracing her truth. As she prepared to meet him, she thought about all the what if she couldn't fit into this new life. What if she couldn't find peace with her decision? What if the Winters family didn't accept her? But as those thoughts lingered in her mind, she remembered the Thompsons' words, "We will always be your family." With their encouragement and support, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. When Emily finally met Victor Winters, there was an overwhelming sense of connection. The moment their eyes met, it felt like the universe had brought them together after years of searching. Victor reached out and embraced her with tears in his eyes. "Charlotte, you don't know how long I've waited for this moment." His voice broke with emotion, and Emily could feel the love and grief in his words. In that moment, all of the confusion, doubt, and guilt she had felt in the past few weeks melted away. Victor didn't just see her as a missing heir. He saw her as his daughter, the person he had never stopped hoping for. The air was thick with emotion, and for the first time, Emily allowed herself to feel the weight of the years she had spent wondering who she really was. But even as she felt joy at being reunited with her father, there was sadness in her heart. The Thompsons had been her family too. How could she move forward without them? They had given her love and a home when no one else did. Was it possible to belong to two families at once? Could she embrace the Winters legacy without leaving the Thompsons behind? The process of integration was not easy. Emily spent time with Victor, learning about his life, his work, and the Winters family history. She felt a strange comfort in finally knowing the truth about her origins. But the truth wasn't just about wealth or power. was about connection, about family. Victor welcomed her with open arms, but Emily knew this wasn't a one-sided relationship. She had to learn what it meant to be a Winters, to step into that world and own it. But no matter how much she loved her biological family, she could never forget the Thompsons. She had spent her entire childhood with them. They had been there for her through every challenge, every joy, every sorrow. She couldn't simply walk away from that. And so, she didn't. In the weeks that followed, Emily found a way to blend both worlds. She balanced her time between Victor and the Thompsons, learning to navigate the complexities of both families. Victor was understanding. He knew that the Thompsons had raised her, and he supported her decision to maintain those relationships. The Thompsons, too, welcomed the Winters family into their lives, understanding that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love. One evening, Emily sat down with Thomas and Victoria Thompson, the people who had raised her. She looked at them, grateful for their support in this overwhelming time. "I'm not leaving you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I'll always be your daughter. I don't care about the name or the money, I care about you." The Thompsons smiled, their eyes full of love. "We've always known that, Emily. We love you, and we always will. No matter what name you go by, you're our daughter." That evening, Emily reconciled her two worlds. She wasn't just Charlotte Winters, the missing heir to a fortune. She was Emily Thompson, the daughter of two families who loved her. She realized that family wasn't about titles or wealth, it was about the connections that bound people together, the love that transcended names and history. With the support of both families, Emily moved forward. She didn't have to choose one family over the other. She was both Emily and Charlotte. She didn't need to leave one behind to embrace the other. Her journey wasn't about discovering who she was, it was about embracing all of who she was. Her legacy wasn't defined by her bloodline. It was defined by the love she shared with those who cared for her. Emily knew her life had changed forever, but she also knew that love was the constant. She had always been loved, and now she had a family that loved her in return. And with that knowledge, Emily walked forward into her new life, ready to embrace the future that was hers to create. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the garden in a warm glow, casting long shadows across the lawn. Emily stood there, feeling the soft breeze on her face. For the first time in what felt like forever, her heart was at peace. She had walked through darkness, uncertainty, and confusion, but now everything was clear. The road ahead wasn't a fork anymore, it was one path that led forward, together. As the wind whispered through the trees, Emily took a deep breath. The weight of the choices she had made, the emotional burden of deciding between two families, had finally lifted. She was no longer torn. She was Emily Thompson, a daughter, a sister, loved and accepted by the Thompsons, her adoptive family. But she was also Charlotte Winters, the missing heir to a legacy, a daughter, a woman welcomed by her biological father, Victor Winters. She didn't have to choose one, she could have both. As she turned, she saw the Thompsons standing together with Victor Winters. They weren't separated by anything. They were a family one that had formed over time, through love, patience, and understanding. Victor stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotion. "Charlotte, my daughter, I never thought I'd get to hold you again," he said softly, his voice trembling. His arms were open, not just to embrace her, but to welcome her home. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she stepped into his arms, finally feeling the weight of years of loss being lifted. But then she turned and saw the Thompsons standing behind her. Thomas Thompson's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but there was no sorrow in his gaze. Only love, only pride. He stepped forward and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "no matter who you were before, you've always been our daughter. Always." Victoria Thompson smiled softly, wiping away a tear. "And no matter where life takes you, you will always be a part of us. Our family isn't just about blood, it's about who we are to each other." Emily looked between both families, Victor, the Thompsons. She felt a surge of emotion so strong that it almost overwhelmed her. She was loved not because of who she was born to, but because of who she had become. In that moment, Standing between these two families, Emily realized something profound. Family isn't bound by blood. It's bound by connection, by shared memories, by sacrifices, and by love. Her life had changed. It was no longer about who she had been, but who she was becoming. And as she looked out at the horizon, she felt ready to embrace her future. The sunset had turned the sky a brilliant mix of pink, orange, and purpley, a canvas of new beginnings. She had walked into this world, uncertain and afraid. But now she knew. She was ready. With the Thompsons beside her, Victor Winters by her side, and the love of both families filling her heart, Emily stepped forward into her future. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting a golden glow over the world, Emily whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Some truths change everything, and some mysteries are never meant to be solved. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because the next one might be even more shocking. Until then, stay curious and stay prepared for the unexpected.